In all the methods we have added to our repository, we are returning a list of product. And that means if we call any of these methods, Hibernate will select all the columns from the products table. Now, our products table is very simple. It only has a handful of columns. But what if we had 10 or 20 more columns? And in a particular query, we only care about the product ID and name. Fetching unnecessary data wastes resources and affects performance. This is where projections come in. With projections, we can retrieve only the data that we need. So in this lesson, let's work on a new query. Let's add a derived query method here. Just like before, we return a list of product. Now let's call this find by category and give it a category. Now to see this in action, we're going to go in our user service. We add a new method here. Let's call that fetch products. Here we call product repository, that find by category. We should give it a category. Now we don't need to retrieve this from the database. We can create it right here. We just need to pass an ID. We have to cast it to a byte. Now we have an error here because we don't have a constructor in this class that takes a category ID. But we can create it right here. We press Alt and Enter and select Create Constructor. Now we change the parameter name to ID. And here we set this.id to ID. Beautiful. Back to our service. We get these products and let's print each on the terminal. Pretty straightforward, right? Now let's go to our main method and call fetch products. Let's run our application and see what we get. So we have two queries. In the first query, we're selecting all the columns from the products table. So we're selecting ID, category ID, description, name, and price. So all columns are selected. Then we have another query for selecting the ID and name from categories table. This is because we have eager loading in the relationship between product and category entities. Okay. Now, when we print each product, here's what we get. This is the default representation of the product class, right? Now let's see how we can use a projection to only select the ID and name of a product. To do that, we go to our project. First, we add a new package. We can call this DTOs. This is short for Data Transfer Objects. Another convention is to use projections. I'm going to go with DTOs. Now, in this package, we add a new class. We can also use an interface. Let's start with an interface because it's simpler. We can call this product summary and change the type to interface. Now, in this interface, we should add two methods, getID and getName. Why? Well, let's go to our product class for a second. In this entity, we have fields like ID, name, and so on. And we have also used the getter annotation. So in this class, we're going to have getters like getID, getName, and so on. We're only interested in getID and getName. So we add these to our product summary interface, getName, and also getID. Now we go back to our repository and change the return type of this method to list of product summary. Let's rerun our application. All right, look, now instead of two queries, we only have a single query. And in this query, we are only selecting the ID and name from the products table. So the other columns are gone. So is the eager loading of categories. But look at what we see when we print each product. We no longer see the default representation of the product type. We see this random type that is generated at runtime. Abstract, JPA query, tuple converter, whatever. This is what we call a proxy. This is a default implementation of our product summary interface. Okay? So this is how projections work. Now, when using projections, we can also use classes. And classes give us the additional benefit that they can encapsulate logic. So as another example, in the DTOs package, let's add a new class. I'm going to call this one product summary DTO just to separate it from the interface. Now in this class, we add two fields, private long ID and private string name. We should also annotate this with getter and give it all args constructor. Now let's go to our product repository and change the return type of this method to product summary DTO. Let's run the application again. It works exactly like before. So we are selecting the ID and name from the products table, but what is printed on the terminal is different. Now we have instances of product summary DTO. Okay. Now we can also use projections with our custom queries. So first, let's change this back to our interface. And let's use JPA body to extract a JPQL query from this method. Alt and enter, extract JPQL query. We keep the method name and just add named parameters. Okay. Now let's rerun our application. All right, look at what we get. In this example, Hibernate is selecting all the columns from the products table, including description and price. And we also have eager loading. So categories are also loaded. Why is this happening? Because in our query, we are selecting the entire product entity, even though we are returning a list of product summaries. To fix this problem, we have to select individual fields. So select p.id and p.name. Let's rerun our application. All right, this time we are only selecting the ID and name columns. Okay. Now let's see what happens if we use our DTO, our class. Let's rerun our application. Now we get a converter not found exception saying no converter found capable of converting from type, abstract JPA query, whatever, the message doesn't really matter. What I want to point out here is that when using classes, we cannot use this syntax. We have to write a bit more code and new up instances of product summary DTOs. To do that, we have to type select new. Then here we have to type the fully qualified class name, including the package. So this DTO is inside this package. We start from our top level package. So here we type com.codewithmosh.store.dtos.product summary DTO. So we new up this instance. We call this constructor and pass these two arguments, p.id and p.name. So the syntax is a little bit more verbose. That's why it's better to use interfaces. In majority of cases, use classes only if you need to include additional logic in that class. Now let's rerun our application and make sure I haven't made any mistakes. Okay, now we're only selecting the ID and name from the products table.